in modern science that we knew 3,600 years ago, which I thought was amazing. But there was, or is, detailed information about Nibiru, however you prefer to pronounce it. And so we have some interesting information in the past, but are there many mainstream scientists today taking a real hard, serious look at this now?
Well, there are quite a few who are. There's not too many speaking up, to tell you the truth, because it is a taboo subject to bring up in the major media, and they know it. But there's quite a bit of interest in some of the evidence that is starting to be uncovered, like some ruins off the coast of Cuba. You know some about this. Tell us what you know.
Well, I know on Linda Howe's website, I think it's earthfiles.com, there's a huge article about some underwater structures that are 2,200 feet down below the surface of the water off the western tip of Cuba. And the way this stuff was discovered, I think originally it was a Canadian company was taking those sound pictures, what do you call them?
Ultrasound, yeah, right.
Yeah, ultrasound photographs of the ocean floor in an oil research study, looking for good places to drill oil, I guess. And they saw all these symmetrical blocks and grid patterns on the ocean's floor, 2,200 feet down. And at one point they lowered a camera down there, and they found a symbol on one of the granite stones. It was an oval, a horizontal oval, and a vertical oval. Well, on the island of Cuba, in the caves, on the walls inside the caves, they're finding that same symbol in the caves up above sea level. So evidently, something catastrophic had to happen at one time to cause the shift, evidently.
Well,
and that's just one, that's just the one in Cuba.
Right.
But there's other cases off the coast of Japan and Okinawa where they've discovered these pyramid-like structures with turtle carvings, things of that nature, and they're definitely symmetrical, appear to be definitely man-made. And then Graham Hancock and others are involved in some research right now, I think 22 miles out at sea off the coast of India, with a horseshoe formation of an underwater city out there. So what's going on here, folks? I mean, we talk about the legends of Atlantis, too, and things like that. So,
well, to the best of my information, there are ruins off the coast of every major continent all over the world. And we have knowledge of the tip of the iceberg of what's out there. And these kind of things would not be there unless great changes happen prior. And they don't happen gradually. They happen overnight. I would suggest, though, that people would look at this from a spiritual standpoint, because this specific passage is going to be accompanied at this time with something wholly different than I feel that any other passage. In other words, we are going through what is known from spiritual sources as an ascension right now, a graduation, if you will. And I don't believe you're going to be able to get away from where you're supposed to be when this event happens. That means you should follow your guidance as what you should do. And some people are not going to have to prepare, and other people should. And so I can't determine what you should do. You got to find that in your heart. You got to feel your own guidance. I feel that somehow, because of the work I've been guided to do, that my family and I will be taken care of. And that could be from a half a dozen situations, but I feel I'm going to be fine. Other people are being guided to build dome homes in the upper Midwest and different areas of the world. And other people feel, that maybe it's their time to go, and they want to ignore the situation. And everyone's got to play out their perfection. There's no wrong or right about how to deal with this. It all boils down to the individual.
Do you think that this is really happening? And if it is, and probably is, for all we know, the FEMA people, or people that normally would handle emergencies, Red Cross, FEMA, or whatever, that might know about this would want to keep the public calmed down about this?
Well, It's interesting you brought up FEMA because their budget has suddenly doubled for fiscal 2003, from 3.3 billion to 6.6 billion. And they've been given an order as of late, which is kind of interesting. They've been told that they want to, they have to learn how to evacuate every major city in the United States. What for? Well, the first thing they say it's under the guise of terrorism, but if you look into the fine print, they give a whole long list of earth change type situations that they're getting ready for, earthquakes.
That's actually part of their criteria?
Absolutely part of what they need to be doing right now. It is written in stone. It is an order that's been given. And it's interesting to look at, that they're being given something that I don't think they're being told the whole story about. But they're given a lot more money to do this. And what they do with it and how they use it, who knows, and how it exactly plays out is kind of interesting. On the other hand, I hear there are plans, the opposite plans may be in effect depending on the situation. They may decide, I've heard, to blow up bridges so certain cities you can't evacuate. You're going to be basically caught up in a chaos. So how they handle what city and when and how it plays out, who knows?
Okay. So then, do you think there would be a disinformation campaign going on to keep people off the main track of things?
Well, absolutely. In order to stave off panic and financial collapse, the powers that be have hired thousands of people within the CIA and other organizations to counter this information, to go after anyone, including myself's character, and try to attack them in any way, shape, or form that they can, to get people to turn away from this. But you know, since this is happening during an ascension process, I think some of this stuff may be backfiring on people. In other words, if you were being guided to this information, if all of a sudden you hear, okay, Planet X is not real from somebody, all of a sudden it may just jog a memory in you. What is Planet X? It may just get you curious enough to actually research and find out the reality of this and find the people that have got the scientific credentials, like James McKinney that I'm working with, and find out the reality of this situation. So, yes, the disinformation campaign's in place. No, I don't necessarily agree with it, but I accept it as part of, I guess, God's ultimate plan, that somewhere in between with the people that are talking about this and trying to get it out and the people that are trying to suppress it, by the end, it'll equalize itself and play it out exactly the way it should. So it's part of the, each side has got their role to play, and I can't say, I can't say that they both aren't needed for a number of different reasons. Now, if suddenly the powers that be decide to reveal the situation all of a sudden to the world, perhaps it would cause panic and financial collapse. Would I want that? No, but that's not the way this is being handled. So, you know, I can go forward with what I'm doing and feel free to do my best to get this information out and not worry because of the other side's disinformation campaign.
Interesting. You know, I've heard other people talking about this same subject, and I've heard them say that qualified people, astronomers, interested in this particular subject, who were trying to get telescope time on certain telescopes around the world, were accepted and it was okay. And then the moment that the operators of the telescopes found out what they wanted to do, sorry, we're closed. You'll have to go look somewhere else.
Yeah,
do you know anything?
Oh, geez, I've heard that. I've heard this for, I don't know, well over a year, that all the major telescopes are tied up and you can't get any time. And some of the stories are pretty ridiculous and repetitive. And some of these scopes are just being destroyed. They're allowed to be burnt up in fires where they could have easily spent, you know, a few $1,000s to protect, you know, a $20 million investment, and they're just not doing it. They're allowing them to, you know, a few of them to be destroyed. So, you know, it is part of the situation. If people were to research this, they'll see the reality of that and a lot more. I mean, anytime there's a large Planet X type object entering to the solar system, there's a plasmatic exchange with the sun. It causes the sun to start going bonkers. In other words, start discharging the surface and causing lots of solar flares. We've had a regular 11.5-year solar cycle now go on and on, decade after decade. Suddenly, this cycle won't end. It's supposed to end the solar maximum 99-2000. We're supposed to be at an absolute solar minimum now. The amount of solar activity is at an all-time high right now.
I know that. I'm a ham radio operator. I know the bands, the long-distance bands are still wide open, and they should be closed. It should be very difficult to use those bands right now, and the sunspot activity enhances that.
It's off the scale. I mean, it's affecting our weather. In fact, all this so-called global warming that you're hearing about has all to do with the amount of electricity and protons that are coming from the sun affecting our jet streams and changing our weather. Our dirty little civilization puts out about as much hydrocarbons as one volcano going off at one time. We're not affecting the weather. So you don't buy into that global warming caused by us scenario. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't clean up our act and that pollution isn't wrong. We're not causing the changes that has gone on acutely since 1995 in the weather. It is all the result of this inbound planet and the solar flaring, the excess in solar flaring.
You know, you mentioned something a minute ago about the, I guess, the electromagnetic effects as this thing approaches.
Okay.
Are you referring to something like, for example, when you walk across a carpet and touch the doorknob, zap? You know, is that the differently charged spheres coming in contact with each other? Is it sort of like that? Or?
Well, the universe is 99% plasma. It conducts electricity, which is totally against the normal knowledge in the astronomical community. Although now, you know, there are a lot of scientists that are coming around there, and they recognize the electrical nature of the universe. We have electrical fields, and we're connected being this close. I think within 15 feet of any individual, your electrical fields start to mesh. It's the same way with the planets, except for it's a lot larger and it goes out a lot farther.
Magnetosphere, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the planets are very much like people in that respect. There's the electrical interchange that is happening between them and between us, and it's all very similar.
You know, not to go too far off the track here, one of the first things you learn in with electricity is there's a current and voltage, and the magnetic field they're all opposite each other. And anytime you cut the lines of magnetic flux or a magnetic field, anytime you bring anything perpendicular through those visible lines of magnetic flux, you generate an electric current.
Correct.
And if you remember the tethered satellite
a
few years ago,
McKinney told NASA, "Don't do that! Don't do that! Don't do that!"
It's one of the most basic lessons in electricity.
They almost lost the shuttle doing that.
They lost 2 of their 3 navigational computers. They almost didn't get home. But what they were doing is they were dragging, I think it was, 13 miles long, the tether, through the magnetic lines of flux, generating a current as they go along. I think what they did discover is a new way of generating electricity out in space when you're in the vicinity of a planet.
Well, you know, James McKinney is a very dynamic scientist, and he can explain, you know, what he knows to your triple doctorate as well as the layman. And what he says, the sun basically works as a battery. It has a capacitor around it, in other words, the solar field. And it works very much like a backyard bug zapper. Whenever a fly comes in to that solar field, it discharges the capacitor, and it causes the bug to get killed, the electric current. Same way, a small comet coming through will discharge the capacitor, small solar flare will happen. When a large object comes in, it doesn't have to get very close, and it starts to discharge the entire surface of the sun on a regular basis. That's what's happening now. These large solar flares are coming off, and you know what? It's changing us genetically. It's changing all the plants on this and animals on this on Earth, and you know, Earth is not even being singled out. I mean, all the planets are changing here. The luminosity values of all the planets are increasing here in the solar system. The moon has actually developed an atmosphere about 6,000 feet of what they call natrium. the poles on Mars are melting. There's been a 40 to 50% magnetic polar shift already on the outer planets, the largest ones. So it's not just Earth. The global warming is a joke. To try to blame our little civilization, all this happening in the solar system all at once is a real joke. Now this is suppressed information that actually came from a Dr. Dimitrov, who used to work with James McKinney, but the powers that be did their best to cut the lines of communication off between them, because he's in Russia and James McKinney's over here. But some of his research slipped out. One of the things that he showed, a real intricate study between the mid-70s